you can't really control these outcomes. There's just too much randomness in the system. And so the thing you can control is placing yourself in interesting environments, whether that's finding the right people, which I think is a prerequisite. Wherever you go, I think you have to find the right people, and you have to be in a place that you're going to be able to thrive as an individual. And then I think finding places that are doing interesting work, if that's possible. And the outcome's going to be the outcome. The outcome that you can control is that you're going to have great memories of the place. You're going to make something that you are proud of, that you made with people you care about.
I'm Larry Cornett, and this is Invincible Career. Well, welcome to the show, Bob. It's been a while since we chatted. I think the last time was at a coffee shop in Mountain View, I think.
Yep. Yeah. Red Rocks. Yeah. Red Rocks on Castro.
I used to go there all the time.
I think that was one of the few times we ever saw each other in person.
It's funny. If folks look at our LinkedIn, you'll see Bob and I kind of cross paths in different timelines. Like we both were at Apple, but at very different times. We were both at Yahoo. I think Bob was at Yahoo like minutes before I walked in the door. It's like you used to lead the Yahoo search team that I came on board working with Pauline Stryland, which folks probably know. And we both worked with Luke Wroblewski at different times. I mean, it's like we've crossed paths, but that was the first time we met. And I think this is the first time I've had you on the podcast, and you've had an amazing career. So, if folks want to check the show notes, you can see where Bob's been, but Pinterest, Apple, Yahoo, you've been all over the place, gone up to the executive ranks, you've done consulting and advising. And as you look back on all that, what do you think were some of the best decisions you made that helped you get onto that path and get into some of those great companies?
Well, look, when I started, I just sort of fell into it because I got started in 1990. I took a job with a company called Claris, which I'd done sales for Claris in Dallas for a little while, and then a UI job opened up here in California, and so I moved out here to take that job. And at the time, Claris was a software subsidiary of Apple. Yeah. And so I worked on the first couple of versions of ClarisWorks and Mac Project Pro, and worked a little bit on HyperCard before it collapsed.
Oh, I love HyperCard. Oh my God, I loved HyperCard. I still have the Bible over here somewhere. Danny Goodman.
Right? Yeah. No, HyperCard was the bomb. Like I totally miss HyperCard. So I think look, the beginning phase of my career was I was just sort of bouncing around between things. And that's sort of how I bounced into Yahoo. I bounced into my CFO. There were many opportunities that were coming my way in Silicon Valley as a designer in the 90s. There just weren't many of us, and there was a lot of demand. Yeah. And so I just sort of followed whatever came along next. But then when the opportunity to join Apple came up, I was at Yahoo. Things were going good for me at Yahoo. And believe it or not, in 2006, I believe it was, whether to stay at Yahoo or go to Apple was not an easy decision. Like both companies were doing well. Apple was kind of rising from the ashes still. Steve had been back for a little while. Yeah. The top product was the iPod Nano. Nobody thought Apple was going to become a multi-trillion-dollar company. It was a $70 billion company that made an iMac. And so I was trying to decide what to do. And for some reason, I became aware of Steve Jobs growing up as a kid in Dallas. And I fell in love with computing when I was in middle school. And I was very aware of Apple somehow. I'm not really quite sure how. And so Steve, as a singular figure, kind of became a character in my life.
Right.
And so when I was trying to decide, there was just kind of an interesting conversation I was having with my wife. And she's a huge Disney fan. And she was referring to some of the, I think they call them the 9 old men, which are the animators that worked with Walt back in the day.
Oh, right. Okay.
And so I kind of got in this idea of like, oh, wow, there's an opportunity to work with a historic figure here at Apple. Like I'd seen Steve featured in lists that listed the most 100 influential Americans in history. And Steve's on that list along with, Thomas Edison and Walt Disney and some others. And so when I was trying to think about going to Apple, part of it was there's a chance to work with somebody who's a historic figure. Mm-hmm. Not that I would work with him directly. I was really blessed to actually get to present to him a couple of times directly, but it was more just to be in the company when he was alive. So I kind of went mostly to get the stories. I think I studied history in college, and I think just the historian and the witness in me wanted to go be part of it. And I ended up having, maybe not a front row seat, but, a pretty good seat to
Sure. Yeah.
really the most amazing period in any American company, I think, in history, which was
Yeah.
Apple. So I joined about 6 months before the iPhone was announced, and I left around the time the iPhone 8 came out, a couple of years after Steve had passed. And so that was just an amazing transformation. And then when I decided to leave Apple, the opportunity to go to Pinterest came up. And again, that was sort of this historic
Sure.
thing. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, it was 2014. There was all this stuff happening up in San Francisco with all the Web 2.0 companies. They hadn't gone public yet. So, in one small kind of maybe 1 square mile area of San Francisco, you had Uber, Lyft,
Right.
Slack,
Yeah.
Airbnb,
Crazy.
Pinterest.
Yeah.
They were just all jammed together. And so I thought, well, I want to see that from, like, I want to know what that was about, because that's something they're going to write about in the history book. So I want to
Yeah.
go see that directly. So it's a slightly long answer to your pretty direct question, which is the way I've structured my career in sort of the second phase of my career, when it's a little bit more purposeful, was I've
Mhm.
tried to look for opportunities to just witness history.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
that's
I like
taken me
that.
to a variety of different places. You can't predict the outcome of any of these companies, so I think trying to do that's a bit
Sure.
of a fool's errand. So I just mostly try to put myself in places where I thought I would see something that would be notable that I could share with my grandkids and journal about and
Right.
tell others.
Yeah.
And that served me pretty well. Not
Yeah.
perfectly, but pretty
Clearly.
well. Yeah.
Clearly. Yeah, I was at Apple pre Steve coming back and right when Steve came back, when we
Mhm.
acquired Next, yeah. When Steve and his lieutenants acquired us,
Yeah, yeah.
and what a to be part of that, yeah. I mean, I saw Steve a few times, and I remember being in the little auditorium we had by the cafeteria, right, when he
Town
came
hall.
in,
Town hall, yeah.
and I got down the front row seat, much like you. I was like, "I wanna see
Yeah.
this Steve that everybody keeps saying, he has this bubble,
Mhm.
right? This
Mhm.
persuasion bubble." Oh my god. I mean, he totally did, and
Yeah.
he got everybody fired up and excited, and you believed every word he said. He was so good at that. He was such a storyteller. And we were scared of him too. It's like he is, you know, a very powerful, opinionated man. So it was a mixed bag of being impressed and being scared at the same time. And part of me wonders, this was back, 98 was my last year there. And I'm like, should I have stayed? Should I have stayed at Apple? I had an opportunity to go to a startup and, get equity and I actually got a huge salary bump going to a startup, which is crazy. But it was ex-Apple people. So kind of like what you're saying about making history, I tended to try to find good people. Like, who are the
Mhm.
talented, smart people, and good things will happen. They always say,
Yeah.
get on the bus with the right people and you're going to go somewhere amazing. And that's been pretty good for me. But there's these moments in your career where there's a branch. Do I stay at Apple or do I go to the startup? I had an opportunity. Do I go to Google or do I go to Yahoo? And I had two offers in my hand. I had to choose. And that was hard. And if you look back on that in your own career, are there times that you could have gone left instead of right and you wonder, did I make the right decision or was this a bad decision going here?
Oh, sure, man. I play that game all the time. Yeah, I mean, should I have stayed at Apple? Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
financially, certainly I should have stayed at Apple. Um, should I have gone to Pinterest? I don't know.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, like any of these decisions, when you see how they work out, and the range of outcomes is so massive
Sure.
that it's
Yeah.
easy to play this game, and people that are successful, you're like, oh, well, they did something right, and really they were just lucky,
There's a
you
lot of
know.
luck. Yeah.
And then you see people that fall out, and you're like, well, that they didn't do well, and you're like, no, they were just unlucky.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I used to describe Silicon Valley is in terms of it being a lottery, and you just sort of had to buy a ticket, and whatever's going to happen is what was going to happen, and it just seemed totally random. But I had a conversation a few years ago with some friends that were also in tech, and I think the better analogy is poker.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
some people get dealt great cards and some people get dealt poor
Sure.
cards, and you can
Yeah.
play them differently.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and so there is an element of do you make wise choices and you're thinking it through,
Right. Right.
but there's also a huge element of luck. And so if you look at companies like I mean, NVIDIA is a great example. If you talk
Oh,
to,
geez. Yeah.
if you talk to financial advisors that that have clients from NVIDIA, they're like, look, everybody like had their stock, and some people held it just because they held it, and
Right.
some people bought a house in Tahoe, and so the people that bought a house in Tahoe have a house in Tahoe, and the people who didn't have 20 million bucks.
Exactly.
It's like, and it's like, well, nobody knew that was
Yeah.
going to happen. Like nobody
Yeah.
knew Apple was going to be a $3 trillion company
Oh
or
my
in that
God. Yeah.
neighborhood.
No, that's
And
true.
and yeah,
Yeah, it's funny you talk about that. I have stock from Apple that I'd never touched. I held it. It
yeah,
I got it in 95 through 98, and I believed in Apple even since I was a kid. Like, I learned to code BASIC on an Apple IIe, had a Mac Classic as my first computer. So I was like, I love Apple and I'm gonna just hold it. I'm a fan. So
yeah.
I never sold it. Holy cow. I mean, it's split like 10 some over 10 times. It's like, thankfully, I didn't just
2024.
say, "Oh, let me." Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I haven't even looked lately.
There's
I
yeah,
seriously don't
it's
look at
20 it's
it.
there was a 4-for-1 split and a 7-for-1 split. So you can do that. I
There
think
we
it's
go.
28x. Um,
Let's good.
look, so
Yeah,
look to the listeners, the way to think about it maybe is you can't really control these outcomes.
yeah,
There's just too
totally.
much randomness in the system. And so the thing you can control is placing yourself in interesting environments,
Yeah,
whether that's finding the right people, which I think is a prerequisite. Wherever you go, I think you have to find the right people and you have to be in a place that you're going to be able to thrive as an individual.
right, right,
And then I think finding places that are doing interesting work, if that's possible. And the outcome's
right,
going to be the outcome. The outcome that you can control is that you're going to have great memories of the place. You're going to make something that you are proud of, that you made with people you care about. And
right.
in the end, that's largely the thing you're going to take away from your career anyways.
Mhm.
Um, so I think if you go into it getting too trying to pre-calculate too much about where you're going to make money and stuff,
Right.
that's
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
impossible to do.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I have a lot of stock in startups that went to 0, so yeah. It's like
yeah,
you just don't know. You just don't know.
yeah.
There's a huge random factor, but I think to Bob's point, that's absolutely right. And I think I tell people this is if you're working somewhere, you're doing great work and you're working with great people, stay. If things are going well and you love what you're doing and your boss is a great boss, your colleagues are great, you should stay. Don't just keep jumping for the money. Because I talk a lot about jumping, but I have a caveat. It's like if things are going well, don't. Stay as long as it's going well. Yeah, I mean, you
Well,
can tell when something's like, maybe it's time to move on, right?
let me give you a different take on that particular problem. And this is a technique I've used in my last two jobs, both at Pinterest and my more recent job at
Sure.
ThoughtSpot.
Yeah.
Um, so when I went to Pinterest, it was a long commute. And the
Mm,
first day that I was on the train doing the drive up to or the ride up to San Francisco, I was just like, "Oh my God, how long do I have to do this?" And for some reason in my head, I leapt to this thing that said, "Oh, well, 4 years, right?" I kind of feel like I signed up for
sure.
4 years.
Fully
And
vested.
when I take a job, I kind of feel like it's a 4-year thing. And so I started to conceptualize that role like it was a presidential term, and I was going to go and hold the office for a certain period of time, right?
Right.
And 4 years seemed like kind of the right amount of time. And so, like you, I have a pretty obsessive journaling habit. And so when I joined Pinterest, I just decided to start counting the days. Again, treating it like it's a presidential term, not a prison term, but a presidential, because I wasn't counting the days down. I was counting up. I
Sure.
wanted
Yeah.
every day to matter. And it turns out that 4 years is about 1,000 working days. So
Okay.
5 days a week times 50 weeks a year is 250 days a year times
Right.
4 is
Yeah.
1,000, and 1,000's a nice number. And so I just got it in my head. I was trying to get to day 1,000, and 2 weeks goes by, and I'm sitting at dinner with my wife, and she goes, "2 weeks, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Well, that's 10 days, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Well, congratulations, you're already 1% of the way done." And my head just exploded, because all of a sudden I was very conscious that time was passing by. And there was a certain urgency that came along with that, which served me really well as a manager because I was just thinking all the time, like things are happening. And it's
Right.
exactly what I wanted to happen. Like when you get elected into a presidential or political term, like time is moving forward. That's how long you're going to be in that office.
Right.
Um, and so at Pinterest, I went in hoping to get to 1,000 days. I didn't make that. I think it was like day 285 when I left. But ThoughtSpot, I did the same technique. And so I arrived at ThoughtSpot, which is a data analytics startup here in Silicon Valley that I worked at. That was my last job. Um, I started counting the days from the beginning. Everybody, many people knew I was counting the days, or tracking the days. But
Sure.
the thing was, it really gave me a framework for when I had to be thinking about succession planning, where I needed the team to be at
Right.
any
Yeah.
point. How are we evolving, things like that. And as I got closer to the end, then I started negotiating with my manager, who again knew that I was trying to get to day 1,000. We started talking about succession plans and how I was going to hand the thing off. And then I ended up leaving the company on day 1,095.
Oh,
And it was
yeah.
far and away the best exit I ever had from any job ever.
Nice.
I
Yeah.
left on a Friday. I woke up Saturday. There was no toxic residue. I wasn't
That's
mad at
good.
them. They weren't mad at me. My leaving was not a reflection of how I felt about the company. So it was
Right.
like didn't
Yeah.
cause this. It wasn't like a reflection of my confidence in the company or anything like that. It was just time for me to go do something else. Um, and so as I tell people, like, look, you can't build a long-term career in a company if you do this technique. But if you're this kind of person that thinks you're probably going to move from company to company, you want to have an impact in a different company,
Right. Right.
time boxing it, whatever that time box might be, time boxing it's a really useful technique, because it creates urgency, because it gives you a
Right.
predetermined exit ramp, and largely because it takes away that day-to-day questioning of should I stay or should I go? And that thing you were saying at the beginning of the
Mm-hmm.
question,
Yeah.
is it going well or is it not going well? Should I stay or should I go? Like if you're asking that question every day,
Every day.
like it's
Yeah.
just, oh my
It's not a
God,
good
it's
time.
such an emotional drain.
Yeah.
But if your
Yeah.
goal is to get to day 1,000 and you're at day 800, you're gonna finish. It's
Yeah,
like
that's
being at
true.
mile 20 of a
Yeah,
marathon. You're not gonna
exactly. It's like a
quit.
marathon. Yeah. That's a good
And
way to
so you
put it.
just put away all that uncertainty and you just dial into the job. And as I
Yeah.
sort of joke, like, look, you could always run for reelection, right? It's not that you couldn't do another 4 years. But
Right.
I will submit that I don't think anybody should stay in a single job. There are exceptions, but generally you shouldn't stay in the same job for more than 4 years. So if
Yeah.
you're leading the design team on the Apple online store, for example, at the end of 4 years, maybe you should go run a different design team inside Apple. Or maybe you should
Right.
move into product, or you should do something. And I think this is particularly relevant to creative leaders because my experience has also been that you kind of start to run out of ideas after a
I
few years,
know.
right?
Yeah.
And then by
Yeah.
the by 4 years, people are asking you to redesign stuff that you worked on your first year, and
Exactly.
it's a very rare design leader that can re-see the problem for the first time.
Mhm.
And so typically what I mean, my experience of what I've done, how I've emotionally responded and how I think most people emotionally respond is when they're asked to redesign the thing, it's very
Right.
hard to let go of what they did in the past and really start afresh.
I think that's
So
true.
I think there's a lot of benefit of just saying, no, that's it. I'm going to do my time
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
going to move on. And I think of it a little bit also like movie directors, right? Like you
Sure.
go in
Yeah.
a movie, movies take a long time to make. For the director, it takes a long time. For the actors, not so much. But a
Right.
director can be in the
Yeah.
process of making a movie for multiple years. Christopher
Right.
Nolan spends multiple years making a movie. And then the movie's over and he wraps that up and he goes and makes the next movie. And I think there's something to that pace and that cadence and that
Right.
style of working.
Right. That's funny. Yeah. I was almost 4 years at Apple, 4 years at eBay, 4 years at Yahoo. Yeah. It was pretty much, and you're right. I would get to the point where I'm like, we're starting to solve the same problems again. And you're
Yeah.
starting to see things happen again. You're like, okay, I think I've learned everything I'm going to learn, and I've done what I'm going to do. And it's
Yeah.
time for someone else. Someone else can do this.
Yeah, and it's really by
Yeah.
knowing you're gonna leave, it reinforces in your head, like, "I don't own this job. This
Right.
is not this
Yeah.
is not me. I don't own this thing. I'm gonna hand it off to somebody else. They're gonna be the shepherd." You think about, "Oh, I need this team to still be thriving 5 years from now because I'm still gonna be a shareholder with these folks.
Right. Yeah.
So I need things to keep moving." I think it puts you in a much more mature,
Mhm.
productive mindset as a leader when you're time boxing it and imagining your own exit from the beginning. I think you sort of shepherd the role in a very different way.
I think that's true. Yeah. The people I've seen that stayed places, and I've seen people that stayed 15, 20 years,
Hmm.
uh, they call it rest and investing, right? It's like they just kind of, they're clock in, clock out. It was a job and they just did it, but they didn't really care. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And I think it just happens, and it happens with a lot of people. And I've also noticed in my career, we all tend to kind of cross paths and follow each other. Like good people will follow good leaders, and good leaders will hire good talent they've worked with before. And you've done a ton of hiring in Silicon Valley, hiring and firing, because that's the nature of the beast, right? When you look back at the people you've hired and worked with and managed, what patterns have you seen in the people who tend to be really good and thrive and succeed, and the people that don't do so well?
Yeah. Well, so there's a couple of really powerful phrases in there that we need to hone in on. One is people who have succeeded on my teams.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
I'm a unique manager. Manage in a certain way, a way that I think is different from many other places. So people
Right.
that thrive with me may or may not thrive with others. And so for listeners, again, I think you have to find the
True.
right leader and not think that
Yeah.
it's some single thing that you're trying to find. I think of us design leaders almost like we're NBA coaches, and some players
Yeah.
do better under some coaches than they do under others, and you just kind
That's
of have
true.
to
Yeah.
find that leader who get into a good style with. So the people that have done well on my teams have been people that are opinionated and happy
Mm.
and content and comfortable, confident fighting about the ideas, and people who
Yeah.
don't naturally take things personally.
No, that's
So they don't
important.
they
Yeah.
they don't they don't get upset when I go a little bonkers and send them a bunch of detailed things of like you need to do X, Y, Z. They kind of roll with the punches on that stuff, but they also, they know how to fight back in the confines of design review. Like we can really
Right.
get into it, and then we all leave, and everybody's fine, and we're all friends. So they don't. They're people that don't get intimidated by the hierarchy, um, and are willing to play ball. And
Right.
so that
Yeah.
means that they have to be confident in their own abilities. They have to be able to think on their feet. They have to be willing to get up on the whiteboard and try out different ideas. Um, they and they have to have kind of the intellectual heft and the knowledge of a whole bunch of UI patterns to be able to really argue and fight in
Mm.
real time. So, and when we hire, like there's two specific things I do in my hiring process. One is we do the portfolio review, of course, where the designer brings in their pre-existing work.
Right.
But I
Yeah.
don't treat the portfolio review like a presentation. I treat it like a creative review. So
Okay.
I'm constantly interrupting the candidate, and I coach them through this beforehand, so it's not surprising. But it's a different. I think it's a different experience for a lot of people. So I'm asking them questions and trying to understand what they tried and different, like the ideas that they tried and discarded. And what I'm trying to test out is, can they think on their feet? Can they
Mhm.
defend the work without getting defensive?
Right.
Because the truth is, what they produce in their portfolio is what they produced in the context of a different team
Yep.
with different leadership, with different creative oversight, with different partners. And so it's only slightly indicative or representational of what they're going to produce on my team. So I'm not I'm not just going to sit and let them talk us through their portfolio. That's just not interesting
Right.
to me.
Yeah.
So the portfolio review is a little bit more like a creative review. Um, and then we do a collaboration session, kind of the traditional whiteboard session, where we get the designer in a room with maybe an engineer and a PM and maybe one more designer, and we stand up a problem that nobody's ever worked on before. So
Okay.
we try to think
Yeah.
of a site idea or an app idea that nobody's got exposure to, so we're all on the level playing field.
Mm.
And then we
Mhm.
just jam for an hour and see where things go. And in that environment, a lot of what I'm looking for is, what's the creative chemistry?
Right.
Can the candidate come up with ideas on the fly? Can they respond well to other people's ideas? Do they build on each other's ideas? Things like that. And so the way I think about it is the portfolio review is sort of like the audition, where you come in,
Mhm.
and you have to play your stuff, and we listen and we interrupt you and ask you to play something else, but you're kind of there playing by yourself, and we test that. And then the whiteboard session is sort of like the tryout. And that's where we
Right.
say, hey,
Yeah.
could you sit in with the band, or
Yeah.
could you go, scrimmage with the team? And I think both of those mechanisms are really important for the candidate as well. Like it's not just us evaluating the
Sure.
candidate. I always tell
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
candidates, like, you need to be evaluating us too, and you need to be comfortable in these
Absolutely.
environments.
Yeah.
And then I also tell them part of the reason I do it this way is because that's how the team's actually going to work. So
Right.
what I'm
Yeah.
trying to do is I'm trying to simulate for you what the working environment's going to be. So if you don't like how I manage the portfolio review
Right.
and questioning your decisions and stuff, you're not actually going to like working here, because
Yeah. Yeah.
that's how I run the show. Um, So
Yeah.
to your higher level question, the people that I've enjoyed working with and I'm still in touch with all of them, is they're curious, they're really passionate about software, like they like deeply care about software as a creative medium, right? They just love software in the way that other people might love movies or literature or
Mhm.
music or something. And as a result, they have like a vast knowledge of software products and software history and know how to think about all that stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they all think on their feet. And then they have taste. But I think
Sure.
mostly it's the curiosity and sort of the intellectual conceptual stuff that they're good at. I mean,
Right.
there's a certain
Yeah.
kind of almost philosophy. Like in some of the discussions we get into, it's almost like philosophical debates amongst philosophers, and like the PMs and the engineers typically tune out of these things because it's just way too abstract for them. Um, but that's what design means. We're trying to figure out the
Right.
meaning
Yeah.
of these things.
Yeah.
And so it's a different kind of conversation than what happens in those other groups.
Yeah. We did similar interviews where the hour in the room was super helpful to see how people thought on their feet and collaborated, how smart they were. And like you said, kind of the personality of, hey, you're going to roll with this. And when the PM is pushing back, are you okay with pushing back in a respectful way? And we had people
Mhm,
that
mhm,
couldn't handle it. We had people that lost their temper. It's like, okay, you're not going to make it here if you just
mhm.
lost your temper in this. But then the people that rolled with it and there was a good energy, it's like, okay, you're going to do well here. This is going to be good for
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I think you touched on something I want to push on next. That yeah, designers are different. They do. I think who embraces design and goes into the profession is a different kind of creature than
Mhm.
someone who might go into product or engineering or marketing or sales. And it's an interesting. There's always an interesting time in design. But where do you think things are going now with design? Because we're seeing a lot of sea changes in the industry in terms of the tech, in terms of what's going on economically, in terms of the way companies are changing. Where do you think design's going now?
I'm not really sure.
Yeah,
If I
yeah.
if
It's a tough question.
and
Yeah,
I don't think anybody's really sure. I guess there's design as a mindset. There's kind of
right.
design as a uh, profession, if you will, in the broadest framing of design, because there's lots of different flavors of design, and then there's maybe design in tech,
Right.
and
Sure.
how people are
Yeah.
going to make money at that level. And I think all that's in flux
Yeah.
for a lot of
Yeah.
reasons.
Yeah,
I'm
the
not.
education's changing too, right? So, I mean, in your lifetime, in my lifetime, the way designers were educated, like I came up through the HCI path, so it was all about human computer interaction and psychology. And then design became part of that. And I think there are people who are more classically trained in design. Um, but then I think we saw all these design boot camps springing up and design schools and stuff that never existed when I was in college. And so that's changed, but now it's changing yet again. So I think the way people are learning design has completely changed in 20 years.
Yeah, yeah. So I think about capital D design as a
Mhm.
philosophy, a mindset. Like it's really, I think of it as another type of liberal art on par
Sure.
with like history or English or philosophy or something. And it's again, it's a sort of a certain way of thinking, and it's a way of thinking with intentionality and meaning.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
want to I want to a designer who's thinking is with a design mindset is trying to imagine a future state and what it takes to get to that future state and how things are going to be in that future state,
Right.
and
Yeah.
why it matters and what it means. And that's based on somebody trying to again create meaning and then ultimately trying to create relationships.
Right.
So I think the best designs, you kind of create a relationship between the company and the consumer, between the product
Mhm.
and the user, something like that. You're really focused on that. But modern America, like, we're kind of focused mostly on transactions right now.
Yeah.
We've
Yeah.
given up the corner bookstore for Amazon, and
Right.
Amazon's, it's just a transaction.
Right.
We've given up investing in the time to go see a movie at a theater instead of just watching a bunch of YouTube
Mhm.
shorts. And in that, we've sort of traded the relationship with the film for
Yeah.
the transaction with the short. And I'm not I mean, we could get into morally judging these things. I'll set that aside for a second. I'll just I don't think it's a leap to say that we've moved into a much more transactional
Sure.
space as a
Yeah. Yeah.
culture. And in that environment, I don't know how well received design as a mindset is going to be. Um, so at the kind of tech, at designing in tech companies reality, I do think that design probably becomes less contemplative and much more reactive and experimental. So
Right.
maybe
Yeah.
the simplest answer to your question is there will continue to be a small group of companies that care about design in a meaning type way, and Apple's the iconic one there. But there are others, Linear's in there. I think Pitch. I think to some degree Airbnb, and then certainly other consumer companies like Porsche and Leica and Lego. Like these
Mhm.
these companies are they're just operating in kind of an emotional plane rather than a
Right.
transaction plane.
Yeah.
But most companies, in every industry, are functioning in a transactional model.
Yeah.
And I think that's far and away true of almost all enterprise software and the vast majority of consumer software as well. And so when you're trying to design those sorts of consumer products, or those kinds of enterprise products, I think it's more likely that you end up in just sort of a we're gonna launch what works and we're gonna
I
test
know.
it with A/B
Yeah.
testing,
Yep.
and we're gonna build whatever the customers tell us they want. And that's a
Yeah.
transactional model. And that's not a great place to be as a designer because it kind of reduces
Mhm.
design to production.
Yeah.
And if design's reduced to production, then people get really excited about tools like Lovable and Bolt and
Sure.
Replit and some tools
Yeah.
that do some amazing stuff in the right hands. But anytime you hear a product manager saying, "Oh, this is great. I can use Lovable and I don't have to talk to a designer."
Right.
Okay. I mean, that's a completely legitimate business model, It's not
Yeah.
necessarily the one I want
Yeah.
to be surrounded by, but it's a completely legit way of operating.
Right.
Um, but that is saying, we don't really know, so we're not going to do contemplative design. We're not going to try to create something with intention. We're just going
Mhm.
to try something out and put it in the market and see what happens. Um, and honestly, if your goal is to make money, that's going to work for you a lot of the time.
Right. Right. I definitely noticed the change. When I was at Apple, we had release cycles that were 6 months, right? So you do a big release every 6 months, and you do a dot one release, in the middle somewhere. But you sat and thought and planned and did research and design and testing for months and months and months. And then the web changed everything, and all the analytics came in, and we started doing weekly launches, and then we started doing daily launches. And like you said, it became a matter of, well, why bother to test and try and research? Just fucking put two things up and test it. And whichever one works best, we're going to go with that. And you end up with this really fragmented experience where it's like, okay, the button here is this color because that clicked the best. And it hits, well, over here, it's different because that clicked the best. And it is hyper locally optimized versus an overall gestalt of what is the experience of this product. Um, and I think it's changed. It's changed that way because of these just hyper quick release cycles and testing. It's interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, I could sit and get really frustrated with it and kind of lament the whole thing and get pretty curmudgeonly about it, but
Yeah.
but I choose not to go that route. So a different way to look at it is, sort of the philosophical debate between Darwinian evolution and intelligent design,
Sure.
right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
at least in the secular sphere, I tend to prefer, intelligent design. I do like the fact that companies spend time thinking about their products and how they're going to
Right.
work and trying to
Yeah.
make them cohesive. I do like
Yeah.
Disneyland. I do like Apple products because I think that they generally get that part right.
Right. Right.
But
Yeah.
Darwinian evolution works pretty well too, man. Like,
Yeah.
you just try a bunch of random stuff. These systems are constantly in flux, they're constantly evolving. There's sort of these organic ecosystems that people go into. And if they're not 100% consistent and cohesive, like, I don't know, people seem to kind of manage their way through them.
Yeah. They do. They
And
figure out
again,
the chaos. Yeah.
from a business perspective, it's working. It's
I
like,
know. These
I mean, just look at
multi-billion-dollar
Amazon.
companies.
Amazon
Yeah.
is from a design,
Yeah.
yeah, from a design perspective, Amazon is a complete disaster.
Yeah.
It is the most fragmented, ugly, non-coherent, confusing mess of a shopping experience you could ever possibly imagine. It is a bunch of different teams operating with all their own
Right.
incentives to
Yeah.
push whatever they can in front of the customer to see what happens. But you know what? Amazon's doing pretty good,
I
and we
know,
all
I
use it all
know.
the time, and they make a ton of money, and we all tolerate it. So I don't know. I don't think it's making the world better, but I don't think the world cares that much what I think. So it's, maybe that's the thing about getting a little bit older. You realize your opinion doesn't matter, so
That's right.
you can kind of, well, it's a good spot to get into, I think, when you can detach yourself a little bit
Yeah,
and just
you make peace
observe
with it.
stuff
Yeah, yeah,
and not feel like you have to judge it. So,
yeah,
yeah, no, I
yeah,
going back to your question about what happens to design, my other sense, and I always am hesitant to say this because it's not particularly optimistic in some ways, but um, look, design should have never added all those camp people. Like, what happened if we added a whole bunch of production designers? They could
right,
just turn out comps without a lot of thought, and
right,
that's not
right.
really what design does. And so my personal hunch is we have about 3.2 million professional designers working in tech today. More, that's the best estimate I can come up with, about 3.2 million. That's probably too many, maybe by a million or
Mm,
so, maybe as much as 50% too many.
wow, okay,
So I think that there's a world where that number gets smaller, but any individual designer becomes much more impactful and more influential because they're able to produce more using AI tools. And
right,
so there's sort of this
yeah,
weird paradox that I think design could become more powerful, if that's the right word, more powerful, certainly more influential, but they'll do it with fewer people.
right,
And
right.
so when you think about design, capital D design, like that's maybe good. If you think about it from designers making a
Right,
living,
right.
that's maybe not quite so good.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. That is kinda I saw Christina Wadke was posting about this too, that there's gonna be probably a whole lot of jobs at the bottom end that are lost, right? Entry-level design, production design, entry-level engineers, where the code can be good enough, when AI can do
yeah.
good enough entry-level code. So I think it's gonna take and shift everything up to the architects and the people who can think and who can orchestrate and use all the tools to create things that they're envisioning, and not worry so much about the ground level kind of production work and the pixel level work. And I think it is. That's what's going to happen. Is the bottom's going to fall out. I
Mhm,
think it's
mhm,
coming. Yeah.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah. No,
So,
it's
what advice do
it's
you give? This is the big question. I want to kind of leave everybody with. Bob's a big thinker and he's been doing this a long time. What advice would you give people listening to this about design and about the profession and where they should focus and what they should do?
well, I'd encourage people to think about the skills and knowledge bases that are gonna be relevant despite what happens with AI.
Right. Yeah.
So there's a
Yeah.
whole, the ground shifting beneath your feet. So you have to kind of say, well, what's going to last? And it
Yeah.
turns out that like the technical skills probably aren't going to last, right? Like
Right.
the
Yeah.
tactical stuff isn't going to last. You need to know that stuff, but you can watch YouTube videos, like you can figure that stuff out.
Right.
That can't be your core offering, though. I think you have to find some way of creating something unique in your own organic brain.
Right.
And my sense right now is it comes down, I'm hoping I can remember all three of these. It comes down to three different things you need to study. You need to study art history to help you develop taste,
Mm.
right? Because
Mm.
taste is
Yeah.
going to matter. So art history for taste, philosophy to understand critical thinking, making arguments, reasoning, like
Right.
that's a
Right.
lifelong skill.
Mhm.
So go study philosophy. And then the last is literature. You should go read literature so you understand storytelling in large sweeping
Mm.
narratives. And
Yeah.
so I do think if you can focus on those things, taste, let's see if I can remember them again. What did I say?
The way
I said
thinking, philosophy,
taste,
yeah.
storytelling, and
Yeah.
creative thing, and sorry,
Yeah.
critical
Yeah.
thinking. If you can do
Yeah.
those three, I think you have a good chance of competing against AI and other people,
Right. Yeah.
regardless of where the technology landscape or the job landscape is.
Yeah.
But if you're just focused on knowing Figma or Lovable or Bolt or something, I
Right.
just think you're
Right.
sitting duck. So,
Yeah. I totally agree.
yeah.
I totally agree. Tools change, but I just posted this yesterday. Evergreen human needs don't. They've been the same for millions of years. It's like there's
Yeah.
things that
Yeah.
humans struggle with and will struggle with forever. So focus on that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff Bezos talked about this. He doesn't look at Amazon and say, what's the new thing that we need to get on? He looks at it and he says, what's not going to change? What's still going to be the same
Yeah,
in 10 years?
that's
Oh,
right.
people are still going to care about customer service and they're still going to care about getting a good price. And
Yeah,
the
yeah.
the financial writer Morgan Housel, who wrote the book, the philosophy of money. No, what is it? Crap, I can't remember Morgan's book. That's okay. Psychology of Money. The Psychology of Money. Yeah, which is a fantastic book. He wrote another one called, I believe it's Same as It Ever Was. And it's about the same concept. Like, what are the things that are not going to change? And try to focus on that list and invest yourself there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. Well, thank you, Bob. Wow, there's so much more we could talk about. But, where can people find you? Because I think there's going to be a whole bunch of people that should be following you on LinkedIn, which I think is where you're most active. But where can they find you?
So LinkedIn's the easiest place. And then you can also just find me at bobbaxley.com.
Oh, cool.
It's a pretty simple bento site, but it'll point you to some of my talks and my different social media accounts, as well as another podcast I do with some friends. So that's a reasonable reference point as well. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for your time. And yeah, when I get back to Silicon Valley, we'll have to grab a coffee again. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Too long.
Well, thanks for making time for me, Larry. It's a real privilege to be with you. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care. Until next time, I wish you the best of luck in becoming an opportunity magnet for the best things in life.